masters. These are the people who gave us contemporary ceramics. You know, most of them were teachers, and then, you know, through their work, changed the course of contemporary ceramics. And then there's the other vein are young artists, new artists. One of the lessons that Thor taught me was that you have to support living artists, and as a result, you'll see that there are, you know, some younger artists. The interesting part about that split is that as a collector, going with an established artist is kind of placing a safe bet. Going with an unestablished artist, you know, you aren't placing a safe bet. You're taking a risk, and I think that's kind of what makes collecting interesting as you get further into it. So when I look at a piece, there are a couple things that I you know, sort of float around the back of my head. One of them is, you know, their source of inspiration. And oftentimes, if I don't understand a piece, I will do a lot of research to try to find out what is the artist trying to do with this piece. You know, where are they going with it? And then have they done it, or are they just copying somebody else? The other part that I like to look at is the technical aspects. You know, Carmen didn't mention the way we were introduced to one another is I took several classes from her many years ago. And the reason I took the classes wasn't so I would become a potter. It's so I would understand what's going on. I think it's very easy to look at a piece, dismiss it as being, oh, well, that's just, you know, very simple. And then when you start looking at it closer, you realize there's a complexity, there's a difficulty, and there's a problem solving that the artist went through to get to doing that piece. So with that, I'm going to try to start my slideshow. Let's see if I get it up. Do you see it? Do you see it?
Give it a minute.
Okay, I've got it on full screen.
Now hit the share tray.
Hold on. Share tray. Okay.
Okay. And there you go.
Okay.
Great.
Miracles of technology. Okay. And for this talk, I've sort of divided the talk into several sections because I want to address specific things that I see sort of different themes going through the collection. I'm going to start off with something that Kim Ferguson talked about, and he used to talk about how, you know, you start with a cylinder and then you start manipulating it, and I think that's a good opening talking about because most people when they start out in working with clay, they start out working with a very simple vessel. So the first piece I'm going to show you is a Peter Voulkos black stack from 1968. Voulkos was probably the greatest innovator in American contemporary ceramics. He's the one who brought abstract expressionism to ceramics. Prior to that, ceramics were viewed as you know, primarily contemporary ceramics were viewed primarily as bowls. And the interesting part about this piece, there are several things that are interesting. When you go back to Ferguson's comment about, you know, starting with a cylinder, this piece is comprised of a plate, 2 cylinders, and a bowl. Now, Voulkos in 1964 stopped exhibiting ceramics so he could develop his bronze studio, bronze casting studio. Is somebody who needs to mute their mic? Thank you. So this piece is the composition of 2 cylinders, plate, and a bowl. he stopped exhibiting in 1964. He returned to exhibiting publicly in 1968 with a show at the Quay Gallery in San Francisco. There were 21 pieces, 14 of them were stacks like this. And for the next 25, or for the next 40 years of his career, he explored those three forms: the plate, the bowl, and the stack. So, very significant piece in his career. This next set of pieces are by Toshiko Takaezu, and in many ways, I don't consider Toshiko a potter, although she was very skilled. I consider her a painter, and her innovation was to close the form. And the reason she closed the form was that she wanted to paint, but found that painting bowls was limiting. That she came to the upper rim, and she had to stop. Finish her painting. And if you look at her work and compare it to someone like Helen Frankenthal, I think they were both contemporaries. They knew one another. I think it is remarkable. And again, something relatively simple, but until she did it, no one else did. Okay. This next piece is by Ken Ferguson. This is a bowl jar. And, here the vessel is far more complex. It's got basically four udder. It's an udder. It's got four globes to it, or lobes to it. And there are a couple things in there in terms of his inspiration. He wanted his vessels to look as though they were ancient bronzes that had just been pulled from the sea. So in order to do that, he had to come up with a black clay. Now, developing a black clay is fairly simple. All you do is throw some cobalt in there. But the problem with that is, cobalt is such an active colorant that when you put a glaze on it, everything turns blue. So he had to develop a black clay without using any cobalt. And then he developed a slip to give him the effect of patina. The other thing that's a technical innovation of Ferguson's, and if you read the book, you'll hear more about it. He talks about linear pots. And a linear pot is the use of either arms or handles, in this case stilts, to increase the mass of the pot, but also give it a very light appearance. And if you look at this pot, it's standing on four stilts that are about an inch tall. And if you think about, how would you, if you put 4 pegs of wet clay on a surface and then put 8 pounds of wet clay on top of those 4 pegs, it would collapse. So how do you make the pot and keep it from collapsing? The pot is actually a hand-built pot. He threw the first 3 inches of each one of the lobes and then coiled the remaining part of the pot. And in order to keep it from collapsing, he would build an armature that would go underneath the pot. It would be made of the same clay, and it would shrink the same as the pot. So if you look at his linear pots that are elevated that way, you'll see marks of kiln wash, and that's how he kept the pots from sticking to the armature. And so, this is one that's it's a beautiful pot, but there's really a lot of technical expertise that goes into creating something like this. The next thing I want to talk about is figurative sculpture, because I think a lot of people, you see figurative work and you think, okay, that's sculpture. Things that are based off the vessel aren't really sculpture. But people will accept that the figure is. And I want to start off with Chris Antiman. And Chris is, her inspiration is 18th century French porcelain, but she gives it a feminist twist. The men are always nude, the women are always clothed. And she, her decoration is incredibly complex, but she uses her decals. She goes to, there are stores in Europe that sell decals for china makers. And that's where she draws all of her decals and then cuts them up and places them. And so the, sort of the border going around the top pillow on that bed is really the border from a cup saucer for a ceramic pattern. The next piece I want to show you is by Jack Earl. And the title of this is Now I Will Sing to My Well-Beloved, a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My beloved hath a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. For all you biblical scholars, that's Isaiah 5:1. But that's not the inspiration of the piece. Jack wanted to mimic photographs. And he had a stash of photographs, and if he thought one was empty, he would reproduce it in 3 dimensions. And a couple things going on here that aren't obvious to the casual observer. If you look at the face and the color, the patterns of the face, he has created the shadows. You see the parts that are overexposed being white. You see, around the eyes where within the shadow you can see normal skin color. And he's created this piece. It's about 33 inches tall. It's about 18 inches deep. And from the front, it looks just like the photograph. The other sort of innovation that he did, his photographer, when he first started, he was using glazes. And his photographer was having trouble photographing the works because the glaze created glare. The lighting created shadows. And so the pieces, he wasn't getting the full effects. Someone who was, reproduced. Was he used oil paint. And the purpose for that was it gave it a matte surface. It gave him great control over, the complexities of the colors. And it gave it a flat finish so that he didn't have the glare problems that he was having when he was using glaze. Okay, this next piece is by Christina Cordova. And it's a portrait of her husband, or former husband. And a couple things going on that, again, a lot of people don't think about. When you have a sculpture, this piece is probably 30 inches tall. It's hollow, and there's a hole at the top of the head, which allows for drawing. Everybody knows that. But you also look at when you get, that kind of scale, how do you keep it from all just slumping into one big mess? And so Christina uses a paper clay. It's a clay that has a fiber content to it, which gives it, it makes the clay more rigid, which allows her to sculpt in larger type pieces. The other thing that she did here that I think is very interesting, the base piece is black. Many of her sculptures are in the natural color of the clay, which is a nice tan. So you get the sense of shadow and the detail of the pieces. But in this piece, it was glazed black, and all of a sudden, particularly from a distance, you lose a sense of the detail. And so she's gone in and used color. It's literally spray painted in order to lighten it up and allow you to see the detail that you wouldn't see if it was strictly flat black. Okay, this next piece is by a woman in Japan named Katsuyu Aoki. And her inspiration is it's really twofold. It's a mashup. You think of a skull as being sort of a classic still life form. And then she's gone and given it this grand Baroque treatment. And what I think is so amazing about her work is that this is carved from a solid block of clay. It is hollow and symmetrical, obviously. But when I first saw her work, I always figured that she had all these molds and she pieced together. And then I spoke with her gallerist, and he said, no, she can't. With all those joins, the number of joins that would be required to create such a piece, when she fires it, it would be, there would be so many splits and cracks that the piece wouldn't hold together. So she starts with a solid block of clay and then works it. And again, you can't, this picture doesn't give you a good image of what it's like on the inside, but it's also very complex. And it takes her, if she's working full time, she can do 6 of these pieces in a year. That's how much work goes into each one. And then this piece is by Beth Kavner, which is it's called Oberian. And Beth sculpts animals, but gives them human emotions and does it with a complexity and a liveliness that is just unmatched. The pieces are constructed solid, cut apart, hollowed out, so this piece is actually very light. And with her work, the subject is generally predator or prey. And in this case, you have the deer on the ground exposing its throat, which would mean that it is prey. And she recently published a book, sort of a catalogue raisonné up to last year. And it was called Human. And it's an absolutely perfect name because her pieces do have such human qualities of expression. Okay. The next topic I want to touch on is symbolism. And if you were in Renaissance Italy, if you saw a painting and it had a halo, you knew that the halo symbolized that there was a saint, and that person was probably the subject matter of the painting. Well, in past history, people understood what the symbols were. Certain flowers implied certain things. Purity, or the Virgin carried one certain type of flower, and you would know that what that person symbolized. So in today's world, symbolism is also being used, but in other ways. This piece by Jason Walker, on the one hand, it's a penguin with a painting on its stomach carrying a cherry bomb. Don't quite understand what's meant by that. And actually, it's a very important time in his life. In the penguin world, the male guards the egg. In this case, his wife was expecting their second child. So he's starting to freak out about, is this a good thing or a bad thing? So once the egg hatches or the cherry bomb explodes, he doesn't know what's going to happen. And on the stomach of the penguin, he has a painting of his oldest daughter, and all she can think about is babies, babies, babies. So that's why you have all the floating cherry bomb. So, you know, again, to a casual observer, it doesn't make total sense. If you know Jason and know the story, it makes perfect sense. And then this next piece is called Assimilation by Gerardo Monterrubio. And this is a wildly political piece. I'm generally not a fan of political pieces because I think most people do them in such a ham-fisted manner that they're off-putting. This piece, I think, is brilliant. The skull is his symbol of Mexico. The painting on it is his family crossing the desert to get into this country. And throughout the skull, you see writing. Those are the names of the family members who made the journey. If you look in the eye socket, you see a candle painted, and that was the light that guided their journey. And then on the back of the skull is the Virgin Guadalupe. And I just think it's such a powerful piece, particularly today, talking about, the immigration issues. And it's done in a way that I think expresses humanity. And now, this is the last section of the talk, and it's abstraction. And, this is, kind of circling back to Peter Voulkos, that he's the one who brought abstract expressionism to ceramics. And it's still alive today, and I think some great work being done that in an abstract manner. This first piece is by Julia Half-Candle. She's only been out of school a couple of years. And this is pure serendipity. She was working on a show, and as she was working on the pieces, she was, she'd have some excess clay on her hand, on her thumb, and she'd just fob it off into this pile. And she kept, fobbing off clay, and then, looked at these little mounds of excess clay and realized they were very interesting. And she kept them, she dried them, whisked them, glazed them, and glaze fired them. And she had 5 of them. So she had her show with the work she had, toiled over for months. And then she had these 5 pieces, which were all called weight, and then designated by the colors of the glazes. And what I find interesting is that all of the weights sold out, but the rest of the show did not. Okay, the next piece on abstraction is by Ron Nagel. And Ron is considered one of the best ceramic sculptors. His work is generally very small. This piece is only about 3.5 inches tall. His inspiration for this came from a book his wife gave him called Lobster Boy. And Lobster Boy was a circus freak who had a claw for a hand and became a serial killer. The end of it, what's interesting about Ron's work, he was also inspired by a job he held in high school. He worked at an auto body shop painting hot rods. And he would put 15 to 20 coats of lacquer on these cars to give them this deep finish. So in all of Ron's work, they're fired an average of probably 20 to 25 times in order to give, a depth to the finish. It's an incredibly smooth surface. In this case, he's got a stucco finish, but the glaze itself comes across as very smooth, but it gives him a really rich color that you just don't find if you were to use a normal, dipping a piece in glaze. And then this is our last piece. It's called Madcap Laughs. It's by Kathy Butterly. And it's also another very small piece. It's only about 4.5 inches tall. And what I find interesting about Kathy's work is that she starts off with the same mold. She has this mold that it's kind of like a cone with a flat bottom. And then she takes that basic shape and starts manipulating it. She doesn't have any plan at the beginning. She just takes this shape and starts working it, and works it for an extended period of time. And then, same with the glazing. She will glaze maybe 10 to 15 times. And the interesting part about her glazing, she's going for an abstract look. And she talked about trying to find a balance. So, there will be pieces that are, areas that are reworked. She does these, very tiny beads, which she handcrafts, hand carves. And sometimes she'll paint them over, and she looks at it and she says, the important part is I know they're there, but in order to balance the piece, they need to be covered up. And her work, I think, is incredibly strong. The other thing that I find interesting about Kathy is that, she's trying to increase the scale of her work, and she's doing it very successfully. And I asked her about that once, and she said it's not just, doubling the scale of everything. It's copying the gesture. And that's the tough part. And Ron Nagel has also tried on a number of occasions to increase the scale of his work. When he increases it, he's looking to just, double the scale or triple the scale. And they fall flat. It's never done well, with the larger pieces. And I admire Kathy because she's been able to do that. I think that's the end of my slideshow.
And we can take questions. We have time for questions.
Okay.
I think I can start off if nobody has one. You can raise your hand, or you can just speak up, unmute, and speak up. I have this. I noticed something on the penguin.
Yeah.
Jason Walker's expecting.
Yeah.
Can you pull that up?
Oh,
it's going to be hard. You have to go backwards. Or no, you can go up the side and choose it. Yeah. I was, Alton restored, my husband restored a sculpture for the Meadows Museum, and it was St. Jerome. He had a basket weave symbol with him and a rock. And because St. Jerome was real pious, and he was always beating his chest with a rock.
Mm-hmm.
But his identity is in dispute because he has a basket weave pattern on him, which the Meadows Museum patrons called Saint Job, because the patron wanted that to be that saint. And if you look on the penguin, this is very interesting that he's got the saintly quality of wearing a basket weave pattern as a cloak on his wings.
Can you see? Can you see the penguin?
Do you think that was intentional?
Oh, I know it. I know it was intentional, but it's not. It's not Saint Jerome. Okay. One of the big themes for Jason is the dangers of technology. So that's actually carbon fiber. And you'll see that on a lot of his works. Like I say, so much of his work is based on the environment and dangers of technology. That's another reason why, expecting and falling or falling are different, because they're very, very personal about his family.
Well, I've seen it in other of his work too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting. I didn't know he was so political. I thought it was all very personal, and now I realize he's really talking about the environment.
Right, and he's another one that I think does a great job of doing, political work, but doing it in a way that, gives you a deeper understanding of the issues and does it in a way that's not off-putting. You know,
Uh-huh. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
I know you're all stunned.
Well, let's talk about Ron Nagel a minute. His most of his work that I've seen, and it's at galleries and for sale, is like terracotta and smooth and no glaze at all. And
That's not Ron Nagel.
oh,
That's George Orr.
oh, no, Ron Nagel has some little terracotta pieces, doesn't he?
He does have a few. You know, I've got the incense burner, but that color is actually painted on there.
Ah,
Yeah,
painted on.
it's a glaze.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
uses China paint, and he'll put, you know, like I said, 20 coats, 25 coats, and it's interesting. I've seen him work. I've seen him put on, and the coats are so incredibly thin. You know, I think that's kind of a excuse me. I think that's kind of a temptation. You know, people want that, you know, sort of depth in the glaze, and so they think, well, if I, you know, thicken the glaze or if I put it on, you know, real heavy, um, you know, that will give it that depth and that richness. And it's like, no, that doesn't give it the depth and the richness, and it risks, you know, flowing off the piece or something like that.
Yeah.
Ron is all about control. And so the layers are so incredibly thin. When you see, you know, like the first layer on a piece, you can still see clay through it. But
Uh-huh.
it just keeps, you know, repeating it, repeating it. And he has a work schedule. You know, he gets up early. This was when he was teaching. Gets up early, sprays it. He uses low fire, so he fires it. Then he would turn off the kiln, go to work, come home. The piece is cooled by then. He'd put on another layer of glaze, fire it, turn it off before he went to bed, and then in the morning it would be cool and he could you know, do another layer of glaze. And he had to have that kind of a schedule because when you're firing 20 times, you know, that extends how long it takes to make a piece.
And you put a person like that who's so obsessively involved in detail up next to somebody like Vogel, who is all energized like a wrestler or some athlete, uh, trying to dominate the material and sort of talking back to it the whole time,
Yeah.
making it conform to his wishes, but not worried too much about tiny details. More the bold stroke.
Right. I heard this story about one year they used to have a production called Super Mud, and you know they'd go and they'd have all these great throwers like, you know, Volkus and
Oh yeah,
Wrights,
yeah.
and they would get up on a stage in an auditorium and they'd be throwing and you know, clay's going everywhere.
Yeah,
And
they did it in Sika.
you know, and someone invited Nagel, and Nagel gets up on stage. He spends about 2 hours on some of his work. They have this very, very thin stripe, and he tapes them by hand. And he will spend 2 hours taping this one line. He pulls out his little air brush, goes zzz, and that was it. They spent 2 hours watching this guy with a piece of tape, and that was it. And compared to the rest of Super Mud, where stuff is flying off the stage, not very dramatic.
Or well, I don't want to dominate, but does anybody else have any questions here today? Okay.
Hello, Ted. It's Betty.
Hey, Betty.
Uh-huh. I'm a fan of your Ken Ferguson pieces. You have so many. How many do you have?
I don't know, 13, 15, something like that.
Why did you choose that particular one?
Um, because of the complexity of it, I wanted to, I was talking about vessels, and that's one. When I first started looking at it, I thought he threw 4 lobes and then pieced them together. And then after I bought it and I talked to him about it, when I looked inside, I realized it has, inside it looks like it has throwing marks. And it's like, that's impossible to throw something that has lobes like that. And so I talked to him and he explained how he built it, that only the first couple inches are thrown. And that was his way of keeping it from doing the cracks. Sort of like Katsuyu Aoki, her way of dealing with things cracking is with a solid block of clay. And what that means in terms of the difficulty working, it's just mind-boggling what she's doing.
Okay. Of course, I know your rabbit spots, but
Those are the things that kind of fascinate me. When I look at a piece, and I mentioned I had taken a couple classes. I look at a piece and I say, I don't know how that could be done. I want to know how, and that kind of holds my fascination.
okay, what's your next book going to be about?
Akio Takamori.
Well, that's great.
And then Toshika.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful, Ted. Anybody else have questions? We're going to let you go.
Okay. I'm gonna hang up. But thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun, and hopefully when you guys get back to working with clay, you've got some new ideas, some things that you want to chase, and best of luck with it.
Thank you, Ted. We'll be
you.
looking for your new book.
It'll be probably next year.
And I want to thank you for being so generous with the book that you've just published. We really appreciate it.
Enjoy.
We're excited. Thank you. Bye-bye. I'm going to stop the recording.